It's funny, I just looked at that because I was waiting for you, and I didn't see you, and then boom, I forgot.
Yeah, no. We had just a short session right before. I apologize.
So let me ask those of you who have been going through this up to this point, any comments or questions about what I've said so far? Okay, I'm going to make the assumption is it's pretty clear about what they are. Now we're going to go in and take a look at the philosophies, you know, the ones that Cresswell particularly identifies. And so what we're going to be looking at is the assumptions are the four, are first of all, if you're really interested in understanding the nature of reality, so that's an ontological point of view. So ontology wants to know what and how people experience a reality, what it's made up of. And this is being recorded, so I have to be careful because the new political terminology is not alternative reality, but what you see there and what you believe in. So ontological points of view are that your study is interested in understanding the reality that your participants are interacting with. Followed up then, if you're really interested in knowing about how knowledge is created and where it's coming from, that's an epistemological point of view. And so if you want to know about how they create knowledge or create understanding, basically your philosophical assumption falls within the whole field of epistemology. And then if you are very interested in how values interact with your subjects, that comes out of the philosophical field of axiology. So the sense of where do values come from, and if you remember when we talked about the ladder of inference in 800, is that how we develop values by the way in which we perceive things and how we create our mental models, that's the area, that's the philosophical underpinning that you're looking at. And then the fourth one is kind of interesting because this one is called methodology. And if you're interested in the process of the research, the deduction and inductive approaches, and that's where your research comes from, that what you're looking at is you're not starting out from a particular theoretical point of view, but you allow a theory to emerge because of the methodology that you use. And particularly if you use grounded theory as your research methodology, this is what underpins it. Because what happens, and as Cresswell will point out, is that you will start out with a certain type of assumption or a research question, but as you interact in the field and you use your research methodology, your question could change during the process because you'll begin to get new information which alters the point of view of what you were starting from, and then you end up creating a whole theory that emerges out of the field. So the philosophical underpinning of that is called methodology, and really it's you looking at and understanding and really interested in the design of the method and how that method interacts with the participants or the field you're looking at. So these are the four philosophical assumptions that you really begin to work from. So again, if you have a tendency to really wonder about reality in relationship to how people are experiencing, that's an ontological point of view. If you're really interested in understanding how knowledge comes about and understanding a knowledge framework, epistemology. If you're interested in the value structures and how values shape people's actions and functioning, that comes out of axiology. And then if you're interested, again, in this particularly is towards grounded theory of starting with no theoretical assumption, but allowing a theory to emerge because of the methodology you use. So what I like you to think about, and particularly the guys that I worked with on Saturday, had them begin to say, how does this fit into your own point of view? And when you look at your chapter 1, that your researcher stance and your conceptual framework, do you see these emerging? And it's a way to begin to think about and to shape what that design of the conceptual framework is. So let me stop for a second and see if any questions about that at this point.
Dr. Gould, I guess I'm confused in that, are we supposed to just focus on which assumption underpins our thinking? Can multiple assumptions underpin our thinking?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, what it is, it gives you a framework to begin to say as you look at your study and what I'm looking at. So if I want to understand how a kid creates knowledge by using, let's say, a particular methodology in a classroom, well, my tendency from a philosophical point of view is that I'm coming from a epistemological point of view. That's what I'm looking at. What it's helping you to do, the more you understand your assumptions, it gives you a better sense of, with your study. Now I'm talking about your study. As you look at your research question, et cetera, is my research question focusing in on trying to understand how people negotiate reality, or is it how they create knowledge, or is it how values interface with them? That's why it's important to understand these philosophies. Now, can you have several of them as you look at life? Yeah, I think we all go through these from different points of view. But as you look at your study, how does the question, how does the purpose, how is that influenced by the philosophy that's underlying your stance or your point of view for this particular study? Does that make sense to you? Do you remember taking philosophy courses, either an undergraduate or anything? So why did you take philosophy courses? Even though they might have been required.
I liked the debates.
Okay, yeah. So you learned a lot about points of view, how to debate. In philosophy, you might have taken logic courses, so you learn how to create arguments. You learn syllogisms. You learn all those things, how to structure knowledge in sentences. But if you've taken, and it's kind of interesting, I'll just use myself as an example. When I went to Duquesne University, and Duquesne University obviously is one of the 2 major universities in the United States that comes from a phenomenological point of view. And so it was weird. Back then, I had to read Being in Time, which was Heidegger's book. And it's like over 1,000 pages long. And it's just like, it blows you right out of the water. And I didn't understand anything I was doing about it. But as I now get into more research and qualitative and particularly phenomenology, now it's starting to come back to me what epistemology is all about. So the more knowledge I have as a researcher of my philosophical stances, or what underlies the development of a particular methodology or what I'm looking at, that becomes important. So it's something for you to think about as you look at this. And as I said, when you take 836, you'll do a deeper dive into this. But I wanted you to get a sense of this right now as you think about that writing or what you wrote in terms of your conceptual framework. Now, this gets even more interesting. So what underpins this? So as you look at this, so let me look at now practical applications of it. So if you're looking at nature reality, the characteristic is reality is multiple, is seen through many views. So the implication for practice then is report different perspectives as themes developed in the findings. So again, depending on the methodology that you will use, again, you're trying to understand how people view something, the reality of something, whether it be a program, whether it be a implementation of a particular, program within a, a university or in a K-12 environment. Now, Summer, I'll ask you. Did you say you teach artistic material or et cetera?
No, marketing and management. So.
Okay. Well, someone was teaching it, and when I was thinking about that, well, even marketing management. So in marketing, do you not look at a lot of multiple views in terms of a particular product or something of that nature, or how to market to different people, how they perceive something? So that's what an ontological point of view is about. And so what you'd be looking at is, and if you look at marketing, so what are the different types of perspectives in order to develop themes from those that make sense to why people are buying something or why participants in a study are doing those things. So if you look at epistemology about knowledge, how are knowledge claims justified? What is the relationship between the researcher and that being researched? So what happens is in terms of that, you're working with the subjective evidence is obtained from the participants. And what then you as a researcher will attempt to do is to lessen the distance between them and what's being researched. And then you rely a lot on quotes and evidence from the participants, as well as the time that you spend in the field or becoming an insider. Now, if you become an insider, that gives you an indication of a particular type of qualitative research, which is called an ethnography. Because what ethnography does is allows you to become part of the culture that you're studying. Or if you're relying on the quotes of a lot of people, epistemology, because you're understanding how someone experiences the development of something, that could be a phenomenological approach. So again, these particular philosophical assumptions help to drive the type of questions and then the type of implication it has for the type of data that you're going to collect. Now again, you need to think about this. This is okay, good. I just gave you slides, you understand it. You got to reflect upon this and you have to think about it. And you need to look at this framework that I'm giving you in the context of what you wrote in chapter 1 to see how it is standing up against these particular frameworks. So go to last 2. So if you're going to ask yourself, what is the role of values? Well, the implication for practice then is openly discuss values that shape the narrative, and it includes their interpretations in conjunction with those of the participant. So a researcher in this situation then acknowledges that research is value-laden, and there's biases in it. There's a lot of those, and that if that's what your belief structure as a researcher is, your tendency is going to probably do research that's going to be exploring the concept of value and how values play out. And then again, as I said, the methodological, if you're really interested in inductive logic, then what you're attempting to do is you work with the particulars, the details, before you generalize. So you start with the data that's coming in, and then you begin to formulate eventually a theory that explains what's going on in the field. So again, and you should have, oh, by the way, Kristen, did you get these things to print right for you?
I did. Well, I'm just going to have to post them.
Yeah, just
the PowerPoint. No, the PDF, nothing ever came through.
Wow, that's bizarre.
It is
So,
bizarre. It is bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you have these, to begin to look at these, and this comes out of Cresswell, and I want to just to make sure that you can start thinking about it, because in 803, you're just starting out. You're just starting to work with understanding the basics of research design, and you'll get into this much deeper, particularly in 836. But it's important for you to start understanding that this is what underlays the development of that conceptual framework. And that is extremely important as you look at the development of your literature review. Now, this is important to understand too, because here's where the interpretive frameworks come into play. So these are a set of paradigms, they're basic beliefs and ideas, and I'm sure you have heard the word like post-positivism, social constructivism, pragmatism, etc. Well, these are the types of frameworks that underpin your own thinking. So if you're a post-positive individual, you're really looking at scientific approach to research, that you're looking at those concepts that come out of a scientific statistical approach. Whereas if you're a social constructivist, you really try to seek to understand the world. Now again, think about social constructivism in ontology. So what you're trying to seek is how a person perceives reality, where it's coming from, or how they construct knowledge. So social constructivism, as you do your literature review and you read research articles and stuff, you will see this type of terminology that this is a post-constructivist or a social constructivist, or it's positivism, or it's postmodernism, which is another form of interpretive framework, how a researcher or people see the world. Pragmatist, focus on the outcome of the research. So if you're a pragmatist, you're not worried about theoretical outcomes. What you're worried about is the outcome of the research, that it produces what the intended outcome of, whether it's a methodology that's used, it's a new program being used, that's what you're more concerned about, that there's an outcome to what we're trying to research. And then finally, these transformative frameworks, knowledge is not neutral. Transformative ones is that the purpose of knowledge or the activity you're doing is to improve society. So these are major research paradigms that you're going to run into when you read research articles in peer-reviewed journals. But more importantly is more important for you to begin to think about where you fit. Now, again, let's go back to Summer's question. Can you be a lot of these? Yes, because it depends on what your focus is, on what you're looking at in relationship to either a study for a dissertation, or if you're doing research because you're doing a research project, or you're trying to understand what the research you're reading is about and where it's coming from. So knowing what these paradigms are important for you to begin to think about. And when you look at your chapter 1 that you're putting together now, a major question that I generally find is many of the students fall within social constructivism. I don't know, Kristen, if you found that when they write in chapter 1 about that, but that's generally the one I find most of my students really are looking at as they're doing a dissertation, because what they're really trying to understand is the world of the participant or whatever they're working with.
Yeah, and a lot of this, just to make sure I reiterate what Dr. Gould said, you're going to go into an 835, 836. This is, so when he says in chapter 1, don't think that what you submitted, you were supposed to have this now, because I can see a lot of the eyes like, oh my gosh, you didn't tell me I needed to have that. So that will come. This is just a framework. And also realize that a lot of it, the table that you're going to be working with, I gave a copy of that table to Dr. Gould. When you look at the post-positivism, you're looking at quantitative, you know, and so with that table, you'll be able to break it down and say, oh, these are the types of methodologies. I see how it comes together. The best thing you can do is work on that matrix, because you're going to need to hear it. You're going to need to read it. You're going to need to write it. You're going to need to go back and read it again and reflect. I mean, when we talk about the neurocognitive and learning sciences and the brain, these are all, it's all new information, new synapses, and you're going to read it enough where it's going to finally connect and you're going to have that aha moment. So you're going to watch this video later and say, I get it. So don't think, because I see lots of big eyes out there, that this is an introduction, and it's an iterative process. You'll hear it again and again, and finally it'll start to really come together and connect to your research.
But what?
Thank you, Dr. Good and Dr. Bates and Israel,
Yes,
for clarifying.
Hi, Israel. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So thank you for clarifying. So we are just starting to the basics.
Yeah, and the thing that's important about this is and like, for example, my guys at Saturday are like, yes, their eyes are rolling all over the place, but as I'm working with them now to have them go back and look at this, it's going to give you another lens to start thinking about this, because as Dr. Betts says, you need to keep thinking about this. You need to keep building on this, because the better you can understand it, as you go through this process over the next year or so, the stronger your research is going to be, and the better you will be able to defend it. And when I say defend it, I mean you'll be able to articulate what the underpinnings are of your research, so that both a defense team can hear this, but more importantly, the reader of your study, not within a dissertation itself, but people who read your dissertation, they get a sense that you're really grounded in understanding the frameworks that's driving your study. That, to me, I think is very important, because we lose sight of that so many times, and we just end up doing it for the sake of doing it. And as I said to you, from my own experience of way back many, many years ago, taking these philosophical courses at Duquesne University, and all of a sudden now, back in my books back there, I actually have those books still. I'm going back to them as I'm doing research with my students. So it becomes part of what I'm going to call your source of a researcher, and it's important for you to have those.
One thing I will bring up is, now you're familiar with the vocabulary. You've seen it in the presentation. You've read about it. All of you have been asked to identify dissertations that are connected to something that's within your area of research. As you're going through these dissertations, start heightening your own attention to how they're using it within their chapter 1, their chapter 3, because I think seeing it in practice is going to help. When you read it in the textbook, it's one thing. When you see it in practice, it's another. And you'll start seeing these repeating themes in terms of what they're using. I'm going to post something from one of the dissertations that I had just in the chat area in a second, so you'll see how it's constructed. But start looking for this. Every quarter, you learn more, and you start looking at dissertations through a different lens. And so really, now as you move forward, start looking for the terminology as well.
So carrying on, so when you begin, so you got the interpretive frameworks, and what underpins this is, again, a set of theories. So those theories, the theories of this can come out of social sciences or social justice. And so when you look at social sciences, what Cresswell talks about here is that what can underpin your theoretical thinking about a study can be your theories of leadership, attribution, political influence and control, other possibilities that are taught in the social science disciplines. So as you think about that, so for example, if part of your concentration is in human resources, you might be looking at a lot about theories that are related to organizational development, management styles, etc. So again, the theories that you're going to be drawing from come from your experiences related to social sciences or out of social justice. Because what social justice then is, are you trying to, through your particular research, really trying to bring about change or to address a social justice issue within our society? So for example, if you think about what we did in 801 and what we're attempting to do to get you to begin to think about redesigning schools in order to make learning become much more palatable and open to more people, well, you can see an interface there of drawing from social justices for making sure that all people have access to information, whether it be through the design of the school or use of technology, but also you draw upon social sciences because of your theories of leadership that you were looking at. So the more you're able to understand what's inside your head, basically, what's driving your theoretical framework as you look at your study, as you look at research, that becomes important. So as you tie it into, again, ontology or epistemology, and then you move into those interpretive lenses that we looked at, now you begin to think about the theoretical structure of your thinking, well, most likely out of social sciences or social justice. Now, let me do one more thing to take you a little bit deeper. So what comes out of that then, from a theoretical point of view, you might have a bent towards feminist theories. So if your bent is make problematic women's diverse situations and the institutions that frame these, you will see studies that are really working from the theory of feminism. And you'll see that in your studies that you read, that it's driven from a feministic point of view or a feministic theory of how institutions basically create different types of situations for females. So that's one form of theoretical framework that you see in a lot of the research. Second one is called critical theory. And there, if your interest is empowering people to transcend the constraints that are placed upon them, basically through race, class, gender, or power differences, that generally says your theoretical framework is coming from what's called critical theory. And again, what you're trying to do is to empower people to understand how people react to these different constraints that might be around them that can be caused by race, class, gender, or power differences. The other one that relates to it is called critical race theory. And so really there, you begin to look at how discrimination from different types of perspectives of people of color really impact how the person interacts, how the person is treated. So here you present stories about discrimination from a particular perspective, and that is of people of color. And so when you read research, you will see within the philosophical framework of that study, they might say that this is based on feminist theory, it's based on critical theory, or it's based on critical race theory. And then also, there's one that's called queer theory, and you'll see this, and it's said this way. What queer theory is really looking at is the variety of methods and strategies related to individual identity, which can also be sexual identity, it can be race identity, etc. So queer theory, if you are very much concerned about that issue, then that becomes the theoretical framework that your study will be working on. And I'll show you an example of that in a second, a student who I had who worked based upon queer theory. And then the last one, and this particularly for the guys who are in the Washington and Philadelphia special ed program, is that there's a whole area around disability theories. So these are the types of issues particularly related to special needs or children with disabilities within schools, how administrators, teachers, and parents work with those. Now, these are not all inclusive. What the point that Cresswell brings a point is that these are ones that you see a lot about and you should think about as you're looking at in terms of research. So again, this helps you to begin to do a deeper dive into understanding who you are as a researcher. And the more you begin to dive into these and understand these, the better understanding you will have of who you are as a researcher. So again, I've given you the frameworks that start out from the philosophical frameworks, then the interpretive frameworks like postmodernism or social constructivism, and then the theoretical structures that underlie this, because you will see these particular terminologies used in a lot of research that you read in your review of literature. And if you're interested in any type of research, whether it's part of your dissertation design or just understanding your work and what research is involved there, you're going to see these terminologies used quite a bit. Okay? So again, just to give you the language, just so you can begin to hear it and some definitions about it. And as you go along, you're going to go deeper and deeper into this as you get into more of your courses and research. Okay? Any comments, questions about the theoretical structures?
No, Dr. Gould, I've been just posting excerpts that you're going to see,
Okay.
sometimes in different dissertations. So I posted one from different dissertations I've served on, just so students can see how the language is in there. You are not going to be writing at that level right now. I mean, right. These students that have gone 3 years through the program and they've defended, and so you'll see where you'll move with the language. And I'm just giving you little snippets so you can see how it comes together.
Okay. So, and I'll show you a couple things in a couple minutes. Now, what I'm going to do is just a quick overview of the literature review, because then Dr. Betts is going to take you into scholarly writing, right? I believe. So again, when you look at, so that's the stuff related to chapter 1, particularly that. And what I'd like you to do is, just you'll have copies of the slides. You can look at this stuff. Just start thinking about it. That to me is the more important thing. So what happens here is, as you're moving into chapter 2, this is what you have to do for our dissertation. This comes out of the handbook. So you're looking at the introduction. Then you have that short, introduction that reintroduces the reader. And what I think is so important, as I tell all my guys, is that remember, you're writing this for a reader to understand. So you need to keep that in mind, how you're writing, so that the audience understands what you're saying, and that becomes very important. That you always keep that in mind, that you're writing not for yourself per se, but you're writing to convey to people who might have some idea of what your study or your content's about, but a lot of people might want to just look at it eventually so that they can learn from it. So I think that's important. So you do the introduction, then the literature review, and what we recommend is, that's the structure. You have a heading for what one of the streams is, then you have a short introduction to the stream as a whole, then you go into the key pieces of literature in that, so that you're building up the rationale for what underpins the study or the question you're going after, and then you do a closing section of that particular stream, which is the rationale for how that stream informs the research. And again, your methodology has a lot to do with that when you eventually get into that. And then you write a short synopsis of the chapter's content. And so what Cresswell basically says to you is that in a quantitative study, this is what the literature review is about. So I'll just let you look at that. So this is quantitative. And that last one provides an explanation for the results in other studies and in the theoretical prediction at the end of the study. So there, remember, quantitative, you're creating hypotheses and null sets to deal with the the issue that you're working towards. So the literature review is very important to that type of study because it sets it up. You're looking for, as it says, it supports the theory, the explanation, and use in the study, and it also gives a sense of where there might be gaps in the present research there that your particular study is trying to fill. So that's kind of a short review of what that literature review does in a quantitative study. And then in a qualitative study, is you'll see the difference here, is that really the document is there is to set the context for the reader. So it does not foreshadow the research questions. It gives a context for what's going on based on those streams, whether it's 2 or 3 streams, and is used to compare and contrast findings with other studies at the end. So in your chapter 4, you will utilize a lot of your chapter 2 in your analysis of the data that you've collected in the qualitative study. Now in mix, you do both. So you'll interact with both of those. I'm not worried about mixed study right now. And so what you look at is in organizing the literature, really what you want to do is to create a literature map to help you put this together. And so what Cresswell recommends about a map is that you put the key items in place, you sort the studies into families, and so really those families become your streams for the study. You put the appropriate labels within the box, and you really develop a map on many different levels. And if you look, I forget what chapter it is in there, he shows you what the literature review map should look like. But when you get to your study, and I guess Dr. Betts, you had been putting some of these things up, here's some examples from some dissertations where they started their chapter 2 by showing it graphically. So this one is 3 streams. This person was looking at implementing instructional coaching at a high school, and that their streams then dealt with definitions, characteristics of effective coaching, looking at the theoretical underpinnings of instructional coaching and adult learning, and the 3rd stream was the models of instructional coaching. So in this dissertation, the student graphically showed that here's the streams that the reader would be looking at by creating this particular figure. So that's one example. Second example would be, here's the one who was using queer theory as this, and she was doing a study on different gender identity in high school. And so what this individual did using queer theory, as she says there, queer theory to understand the population. So what was the driving streams is queer theory and heteronormativity, and the GSD student identifying what the student is and why they're at risk in a high school environment, and students belonging and supports. So you can see what that literature review is drawing from, and she put that together graphically to understand what that mapping for the chapter 2 will be about.
Dr. Gould, can I ask a question?
Yes.
You talked about, theoretical framework and how, if I'm understanding you correctly, that's like the lens through which we're viewing everything, more or less. I don't know.
Yeah.
Would you recommend, and this is clear on the 2 examples that you just showed us, but I mean, should the theory that we're using to kind of drive or understand our study, should that always be part of one of our streams of research? I know that maybe a fair question, but I can.
Yeah, it will drive the development of your streams.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, here, now what's interesting about this one, so let me go back to the other one. So she specifically says that queer theory definitely is a stream, and there's a whole series of literature about it. So she talks about Sullivan and Myers and these people, and then in her review, she utilized those to help the reader to understand how queer theory fits into that. And queer theory deals with what, again? Identity. So a person's identity. So she decided to use the theoretical terminology there so that you would understand that these particular pieces of research that she was utilizing there are labeled queer theory. Now, go ahead.
Just to jump in, when you start looking at dissertations, when I try to show it just with the little paragraphs, like the second one, it says a pragmatic approach informed the dissertation study.
Right.
This study assumed both the post-positivism and advocacy participatory knowledge. So I think that's the key. You're not writing about it.
Yeah.
You're using it as really the foundation. What you're seeing here are the streams. The conceptual framework are your 3 streams and how they come together to support the research that you're doing. You won't be writing about post-positivism in your conceptual framework. Those are the streams. But later on, when you write chapter 1, not now, in a lot of this, it's you haven't chosen the methods, you haven't learned enough to decide the specific methods that you're going to use at this point. So to write the section on the constructive or the conceptual framework is a little advanced. And so this is a foundation to get you thinking along that lines in terms of the methods. So look at this as informational, but I don't want you to walk away saying, oh my gosh, what am I going to do from here? It simply is something that will help you inform, and it'll come to more fruition as you continue through 835, 836, and through that point.
Yeah, and the point here is I forget who the person who did it, but this is sort of look at this as an advanced organizer. So we're giving you, and I debated whether to do this, but then I said, yeah, because now at least you're beginning to think about this. And as we're both saying to you, don't worry about this in terms of your project that you're doing right now. But you might start thinking about this and start rewriting your chapter 1 and say, oh, wait a second. Yeah, I see what it is. And if you want to, you can put it in. It's not important now. The more important thing is for you to understand that as you get deeper into writing the dissertation, this will be the things that you're going to start encountering. And the sooner you begin to hear about them, knowing that you don't have to create it right at this particular time being, that it's going to be sitting there in your mind as you move through these courses, particularly when you get into 835 and 836. So it's just to say, okay, the same way when we looked at in theory trying to find the source of your leadership, well, here's where you starting to think about the source of who you are as a researcher. So to one extent, you probably can start thinking about that, yeah, maybe I am a social constructivist. I'm very interested how people construct reality. And so if I am worried about that, well, there's a philosophical underpinning of it that comes out of ontology, that's fine. But now at least you're beginning to look at this. And when you look at mapping out what your chapter 2 looks like, this is a very simple one to understand. Here the person's saying is, I want to look at coaching, and these are the 3 streams of research that I'm using to support this idea of my looking at the implementation of instructional coaching at a high school. That's all it is. So it's a way of looking at it. And the more you interact with this, the more feedback you get from Dr. Betts and from me with my guys, it's going to start making sense to you.
So I'll say one last thing. We won't do the writing. We'll have to hold off on that because it's a whole presentation on this Friday. But if you remember, Summer and other students, when we were in 815 and you started mapping you had your concept map with your streams, there were a number of students that really struggled with what is a stream? I understand these areas. I understand, but it was trying to figure out what a stream meant. No matter what analogy I gave, It was really hard. And then the more you looked at different dissertations, all of a sudden I had students saying, oh my gosh, I actually have streams. I couldn't see them as streams. And when we worked with the Mackie McAvoy book and you were introduced to the purpose, the significance, and I kept saying, you're just drafting concepts. You were not going to write anything, but it gets you thinking about, you can't even come up with streams unless you know relatively what your problem is and what your purpose is. And then in 803, when we wrote chapter 1, and people were saying, can I use what I had in 815? And I said, no, it's a different lens. Now we're looking theoretically more at the underpinnings. What is the problem? How do you state that? And we expanded it. And so very much everything we've covered tonight, it's that introduction. You know the terminology. You're going to start seeing it come up. And all of a sudden you're going to say, oh my gosh, I get it. So I really want you to reflect where you started with that concept map and how strong all of you are now in these different sections. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens through reading, reflection, and then starting to apply it.
Yep.
Does that help? Think of where you are now, but where you were then. I mean, it's hard to see how much growth has taken place. It's tremendous what you have done literally in a 16-week period. It's tremendous.
And again, this is just, like I said, it's just the beginning. I mean, as I said, I go back, I still marvel at myself that I have books, and I was in college back in the 60s, and I still have some of those books there, and I'm actually going back to those books because now I understand what I was given back in the 60s now at the ripe old age of 70. So it's like, whoa. So my point is, and I think, Kristen's saying the same thing is, okay, now you're starting to hear about this. It's going to be there. You're going to keep working with it. But more importantly, what I think it's going to help you, that when you start reading some of the peer review articles that you're going to start exploring, you're going to see concepts like that in the discussions of the studies or in some of the dissertations you might be looking at. So that's important. And then the only last thing is this slide here. And I just, even today, I was working with a student who's getting ready for defense. And again, it drives me crazy. So I'll let you know this right now. And probably, Kristen, it drives you nuts too, is that you got to understand how to do APA. That is so important. And so, as Cresswell says, you got to use the style manual, 6th edition. I think that's the latest one. It's waiting for the 7th, but it hasn't been there. End of text references, very important. Within text references. The one that drives me the craziest is that you put a citation outside the sentence. So what happens is you end a sentence with period, then you put the parentheses and the date or the name, and then a period again. Don't do that, please. Especially if you have me, that will drive me right up the wall. Or if you want to drive me up the wall, you would do that. But my point is, make sure you understand APA in relationship to writing your literature review as it relates to references, how to do quotes, block quotes, etc. That's going to help you so much. That's your Bible.
Yeah, I will say, I just put a link. I have an APA resource. You haven't had me if you're in Dr. Gould's class for a course. I know everything APA, and if I don't know it, I will call the APA office. I know they probably have me on speed dial, and no, I call because I've been asked questions that they didn't even have answers to.
Yeah.
So I say that because the link that's in there includes everything that goes beyond the textbook as well. There's 2 PowerPoint presentations I created called Common Mistakes. And I call them common mistakes because I don't care what papers I grade, they're the same mistakes that always come up. So look at that PowerPoint presentation. There's one on in-text citations and one on references. And these are the most common ones. I even have a video to walk you through to say, when you put the period, it must go here. It can't go anywhere else. So watch those presentations. And the last thing I'll say is, be very careful of APA websites that are not either the Purdue OWL one or the APA website itself. I've had students send me an email and say, Dr. Betts, I lost 5 points on this assignment. I know my APA is right. Here's the website that I used. And I have to call that university and I get a hold of their librarian and say, you're using the 5th edition. I have doctoral students that are getting wrong information. You need to update your stuff. So don't trust outside sources. They're not always updating them. So as Dr. Gould said, make sure you have that. If you've ever got questions, let me know. And I would like to host something on scholarly writing. I did a whole presentation on it tonight, literally to walk you through short, succinct, how to avoid long clauses. I even have examples of what I get, which could be one sentence that is like 6 lines long, and how to transform that into a research statement. Writing for research is very different than writing or creative writing, and it's a big paradigm shift. So I'll look to find another night to
Yeah, when you do that, let me know, because I want my guys to take that one too.
Yeah.
All right?
It will help you tremendously. You'll love writing for research. It's so much easier. I mean, it gets rid of all the gray, it gets rid of the flowery, and you just read it. And if it doesn't have a statement, then get rid of it. Writing for research is just telling me what I need to know.
So I think that's it. Yes, it is. Look at that. So I'm just going to stop the share. So hopefully, you got confused enough, but it's a confusion that will help you really get moving forward. We have the slides for you so you can go through those. And if you have any questions about it at any time, you guys have my email and my thing. Even those you in Dr. Beck's class, you can, ask me questions about it, etc. So that's okay. All right.
Okay. Well, I look forward to our next live session, and I will look. I'll maybe send out a poll and see if people are interested in the scholarly writing. I will say I wish I would have had it when I was in my doctoral program.
Yeah,
It took me sitting as a reviewer with many journals to come up with all the things that I can share now. So enjoy your evening. Send us emails if you have any questions, and it was lovely seeing everybody tonight.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good night.